Welcome to the Three-Man Weave, brought to you by Vanquish The Foe. My name is Keith Shirts. I'm in the homeland in Provo, out in D.C. We also have Steve Pierce, and out in California, Jake Welch. BYU goes down to Ole Miss, 94-90 in the first four of the NCAA tournament, in what was easily the most bipolar game I've seen out of BYU in, ever.
That's just about what I have to say, right? Like, that was the tale of two halves, like, if you're going to go Dickens here. It was the best of times, and then it was the worst of times. BYU was so good in the first half. They shot the ball incredibly well, and that covered up a lot of the sins. Shooting the ball well covers up a multitude of sins. The one thing it doesn't cover up for very long is an absolute lack of defense, which we've seen before with this team, and we saw it again tonight. This game was kind of a microcosm of the entire season. When the shots are falling, everything is good. The BYU looks like they can beat anybody. That's why you had all the experts saying that they were going to make it to the Sweet 16. But the problem is when the shots stop falling, BYU doesn't play good enough defense to stay in games, and we saw that in the second half. Go 10 of 15 in the first half from three, cool off considerably in the second half, can't stop dribble penetration, can't get defensive rebounds, and Ole Miss just slowly chipped away at that lead, dunk after dunk, open shot after open shot, until they were up 4. And by the time they were up 4, it felt like they were up 20, just because of how poorly BYU was playing. So it was a really frustrating game, but really shouldn't be too surprising to anyone that's watched this team all year. They are who we thought they were. Great shooting team when they're hot. When they're not hot, it's not so good. And that's what we saw tonight in the second half.
The thing that was surprising to me was to see a team in BYU that, they like to run and get out there. In the second half, we seemed to have trouble getting out and not turning the ball over. I mean, for some reason that zone trap that Ole Miss was running seemed to kind of just do a number on us. And I think Ole Miss had 15 turnovers overall, and they got 25 points off turnovers. Now, I mean, 15 doesn't seem like a crazy number of turnovers. I think the Lakers had like 28 in their game last night. Then again, that's the Lakers. But the fact that so many of those points or so many of those turnovers were, just direct result to baskets. I think that's the biggest thing that I noticed was, we've always played bad defense, but we've never had bad offense translate to easy buckets and bad defense. So I think that was one of the biggest things. That was kind of uncharacteristically bad for the Cougars tonight.
Agree. I think the points off turnovers was really the surprising thing. We'd seen them giving up a lot of second chance points like all year. The addition of points off turnovers was the big surprise, and that was what did them in. But you give them multiple possessions and you give them empty possessions for, the way BYU's offense was going, they were stopping, themselves with silly turnovers. Also, Ole Miss forced a lot of steals. But I thought that they did really well. I thought Stephon Moody was excellent. I thought he was everything they said he would be. And I thought he was an excellent player. On the BYU side, Tyler Haws was absolutely fantastic tonight. 33 points, and really scored in every way you can. And I'm going to miss watching Tyler Haws.
Yeah, he was great tonight. I mean, if you're going to go out, that's the way you want to go out. How many did we wind up with, Keith? 31?
33.
33. I mean, Tyler was great. He literally tried to put him on his back there at the end and hit some really great shots to kind of keep it close. But ultimately, it wasn't enough. And that's too bad for Tyler because he deserved better because he's such a great player. He's an all-time great at BYU, obviously.
He finishes 20th all-time on the career scoring list for the NCAA.
That's amazing. I mean, he's an all-time great player, and it's just too bad that it had to end here. Obviously, you would have loved to watch him play a few more games. I'm going to miss watching him play. But, this is kind of the story of the year, right, and it was, again, encapsulated in one game. If there was anything that would have helped here, it would have been to have a guy like Nate Austin protecting the rim. It would have been to have a guy like Anson Winder be healthy and be able to help stop dribble penetration. It would have been to have Kyle Collinsworth not tweak his knee in the first half and not look like the same player after that. Like, the injuries this year were, not to use that as an excuse, but they just kept coming. It would have been nice to have a guy like Jamal Aites in the second half who could be a back-to-the-basket scorer that you just throw the ball in the post and get an easy basket and not have to chuck up threes. Like, these injuries that BYU suffered over the year, yeah, you don't want to use them as an excuse, but they played a major role in why this team was weak in the places that it was weak. Sure, BYU hasn't guarded particularly well the last few years, even when they were all healthy. But particularly the particular glaring weaknesses, like down on the boards, like missing a guy like Anson on the perimeter, there's just no denying the impact that those injuries had, and you saw that again tonight. You saw Frank Bartley playing crunch time minutes in an NCAA tournament game. As much as I like Frank Bartley, that's just something that can't happen. I don't know if Skylar Halford was dead or what, but I still don't understand the decision by Dave to go with Frank Bartley down the stretch, and it hurt.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there was that one time where he was taking the ball up the floor, and he just, I think he did what I did continually in the third grade, and Steve, you can testify to this, but just you fell down while trying to dribble the ball. It's like walking and dribbling the ball, just like it ceased to, like, it for Frank was like the hardest thing in the world at that moment in time, and he just fell over. It was a lot of sloppy basketball on both sides, and it was just so frustrating to watch at times. Getting back to the point about Tyler Haws, I mean, I don't think we're going to fully understand how beautiful and fantastic his play is until we watch a BYU game next year, where we're not going to have someone. It's like, okay, we just need automatic points right now. We need someone who can get us a basket, and Kyle's not having a great game, or whoever's not having a fantastic game. It's just going to be a difficult slug for us at certain points. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it's tough to see him go out like this, and I really hope the naysayers won't be like, well, this is a testament to Tyler and how much he really Jimmer won tournament games and Tyler only won one, and that was only because Jimmer was on his team. It's like that shouldn't take away anything from his overall career. The fact that he didn't have a big, deep tournament run, because think of how many other great BYU players who didn't have those. So I don't know. It's tough. I mean, it's tough that we shouldn't be debating his legacy right after this tough game.
Yeah, and to the Jimmer point, like, Jimmer was a great player, but I went back and watched like a few of his tournament games, not like the whole thing, but just snippets a while ago, and I forgot over the years, and maybe I didn't notice it at the time because of how magical that run was and everything, but Jimmer had some horrific shot selection, and particularly that Florida game where they lost in overtime that knocked him out his senior year, like, he was taking some terrible shots. Everyone always blames that game on Kyle Collinsworth because he missed the free throw at the end of regulation. But the missed offensive rebound, or the missed defensive rebound at the end of regulation was huge. Jimmer taking like 3 back-to-back deep contested threes that all missed when he was obviously off were terrible. Like, so the comparing Tyler to Jimmer, like, you're like comparing him to a mirage of like what you remember Jimmer to be. You only remember the half-court bomb against Utah and all the 50-point games against Arizona he didn't miss, and in hindsight, we cloud out like the bad stuff. And Jimmer, that's not to say Jimmer's not a great player, and hopefully Tyler will get that same treatment. People will remember the great things that Tyler did and cloud out some of the stuff that isn't so great. Hopefully he gets the same treatment. I don't know if he will, but Tyler deserves, everyone's everlasting love and respect for what he's given to the BYU program, because, to be frank, there's not very many other guys like him, and we may not see another one for, a while. And I hope we do, just as a BYU fan, but these kinds of guys don't come around every day.
I think that's a really important part. And by the way, if you're trying to compare somebody to the things that Jimmer Fredette did and sort of the things that he was able to accomplish in his greatest moments, like you're saying, if you take the greatest Jimmer moment versus the greatest Tyler Haws moment, well, Jimmer had a better top moment, right? But I do think that it's a little bit hard to evaluate. I think the biggest thing that will remember about this season, like the biggest lesson I learned is balance is so key. Just to have a balanced roster is so important, and I think that's one of those things that this has been probably one of the most unbalanced lineups that BYU's had in the Dave Rose era, and I just think that without a balanced roster, without any front court presence this year, or bringing along and just kind of doing it by committee and just piecing it together and hoping it all comes out. It just has not been a way for BYU to be successful. And so for me, that's like the big thing I learned this year, and I knew it before the season came, but to see, the caliber of players this team has and to see the struggles that they went through and the fact that they lost in a first 4 game with all the talent that they had in that backcourt, the critical nature of basketball of having balance on all 5 positions. That's the big takeaway for me. What will you guys remember from this season?
I think that's a great point about balance, Keith, and that goes to, another thing that I noticed watching those games from, the 2011 season is, everyone talks about Jimmer, and Jimmer was undoubtedly the star of the show, and he gets all the credit, and he deserves a lot of that credit. But Jimmer that was an incredible team. That had incredible balance. He had Jackson Emery at the 2. He had Kyle Collinsworth at the 3. He had Noah Hartsock at the 4. We had Brandon Davies at the 5. Abuo coming off the bench potentially. I guess Collinsworth didn't really start till later in the year. But to make that point about balance, when did the wheel start coming off of that team? They came off when Brandon Davies got suspended, and the balance was lost.
They went 3-2.
Yeah. And they went 3-2. They struggled against Wofford. They got in the first round of the tournament. They got incredibly hot and beat Gonzaga by 20. And then they struggled and lost to Florida. And so it was, the balance was off, and things went down the tubes once Brandon Davies went out. They didn't have that low post option. And they still had Noah Hartsock, who's a great low post player. But not quite the same as having 2 of them down there. So the balance is hugely key, and I think that's a big takeaway for me too, particularly moving forward of, what does this team look like next year? Do we have better balance? I thought we would be pretty balanced this year until we had the rash of injuries. Hopefully, if everyone stays healthy next year, this team is more balanced. I mean, you're going to miss Tyler Haws. That's unavoidable. He's an amazing player, and that absence will be felt. But you still are going to have Kyle Collinsworth, who's a historic player in his own right. You'll still have Chase Fisher. You'll have, hopefully, Nate Austin. You'll have Jamal Aites. You'll have Kyle Davis. You'll have Corbin Kaufusi down low. There's a lot of post talent there. So hopefully this will be a more balanced offense. BYU will always be able to run and gun and shoot the ball at the guard positions, I think. The question will always be down low. And we know Eric Mika is off on the horizon, Peyton Dastrup's off on the horizon, but dealing with the immediate future, it seems like that next year's team will be more balanced than what we saw this year. But again, at the end of the day, it ultimately comes down to who actually finds their way to the floor. And this year, you would have thought there would have been more balance, but injuries got in the way. Hopefully we don't see a repeat of that next year, because I don't know as BYU fans how much more bad luck we can take or deserve.
Steve, when you cross your fingers like this, it makes it look like you're giving everyone the middle finger. This
is what I think of you, Stefan Moody.
So this is, for me, I always have to bring this back to football because I'm kind of a football guy. This year reminds me of like any Texas Tech style football team. It's like a Mike Leach, just like a real air raid type offense where it's like, we're going to put up 1,000 points. We're also going to give up 1,000 points. So it's like, all right, who's going to make the last stop kind of thing? And it makes me wonder if it's the same thing in college basketball, because if you look at a lot of these college football teams, I mean, besides Urban Meyer and Nick Saban, these are the coaches, it's like you kind of have to pick between, are you going to be an offensive-minded team or are you going to be a defensive-minded team? I mean, you look at BYU, I mean, usually it's, this last year was a little bit better offense, not as great defense. Utah usually has a pretty good defense and a terrible offense. Usually, I mean, you can only really pick between, one of those. And so I wonder if it's starting to be the same thing in basketball. If it's like, all right, if you want to have this crazy, insane, high-powered offense, are you sacrificing something at the defensive end? And in order for BYU to get better offensively or defensively, do they have to sacrifice anything on offense? I don't know that I know that much about how the game works at the college level, if that is true, or if that needs to be the case, if it's something that Dave Rose needs to be doing in his practices, or a lot of people on Twitter are saying within his coaching staff, which I don't know needs to be the case. But is it possible for BYU to go from can they score 70 points a game and get better on defense instead of scoring 85 points a game and playing the defense that they're playing right now? I don't know. I mean, it just seems right now this the year of Texas Tech, and it was, all right, we're going to score a lot of points, we're going to give up a lot of points, and we'll see what happens at the end.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth to that, Jake. I think there's also, I think you can do both in basketball. I think that BYU has proven in the past that you can do both. A couple of years, BYU's always been able to score. That's never been an issue for them. They've always been up in the uppermost reaches of the NCAA in scoring efficiency. That probably will never change. But they have been a good defensive team in the past. 3 or 4 years ago, they were a top 25 defensive team. They knew how to get stops. They've had great defensive teams at BYU under Dave Rose. And it's just these last 3 years where they've really struggled. And I don't know what it was that changed.
Can I give you a theory?
Yeah, give me a theory.
Defensive specialist. When Dave Rose took over, he quickly put Lee Cummard on the other team's best player every game, and allowed them to kind of swallow up. They, like Lee Cummard would have guarded Stephon Moody tonight, and he would have had a lot of problems. Or he was able to throw Emery, or he was able to throw Abuo at people, and they've always had at least one guy who was a good perimeter defender. I actually don't think we've ever had a very good interior defender. Maybe Chris Miles might be my favorite interior defender of the Dave Rose era. I don't know, but actually, you know what? Noah Hartsock was a good. He blocked a lot of shots, at least. Anyway, the point is, I don't see a defensive specialist where you can run that guy at the other team's best player and it's going to make his life horrible. They tried to do that tonight with a little bit of Frank Bartley, and in some ways, I don't know. It certainly wasn't as good as we've seen in the past.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And I think that, Anson Winder has kind of played that role the last few years, but Anson's not the same type of player as Lee or Charles or even Jackson. He doesn't have the length, and particularly this year it became a problem when he got hurt and his mobility wasn't there and he couldn't stay in front of guys. And so I think Rose kind of just went to the next most athletic guy on the roster and kind of tried to make Bartley into that wing defender, that wing stopper. And God love him, and he's athletic, I guess, but Frank Bartley does not know how to play defense. Like he just cannot execute it mentally. And maybe in short spurts on specific plays, yes, but over the course of a game, Frank Bartley is not a good enough defender to be your number one defensive stopper on the wing. And so even next year, when you get like a Nate Austin back, who I really do think is a good interior defender, really smart defender, really good with his positioning, I think that will help a lot down low. I think you're right that you still do need that elite wing defender, that role guy who's just doesn't care about offense, even if he does care about offense, but that he can dedicate a lot of his energy to just stopping the other team's best guy. And I don't know if there's a guy on the roster who can do that. I don't know who the answer is. So that's an open question going into next season for Dave Rose.
On the Nate Austin thing, I think he's a good zone defender, but I do not think that he's very strong man.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Okay. All right. Just another thought. He's a good rebounder, obviously, and that helps. That's a huge part of defense. But I think if you match him up against somebody, I think that's not a great idea.
Yeah, that's probably true. But, I'll take at least somebody who can play zone as opposed to what we have now, which is somebody that can really play neither particularly well. Maybe Corbin can become a really great man defender over the summer.
There's a chance.
There's a chance. He has the tools, and he made strides this year. So hopefully that can happen in between Nate and Corbin. No matter what defensive scheme they're running, they'll be able to have somebody down there who can be effective.
All right, well, so naturally at the end of every season, your mind goes to the next season, and you begin kind of trying to structure everything together. Lots of new additions to the team, but there's a question that's come in asking who do you think the starting five, what will the starting five look like next year? This is from Tim Eddington. So next year's starting five, he says he thinks Kyle, Nick, Chase, Nate, and Jamal.
I think that's probably a pretty safe bet. I'd say Kyle is a lock at the 1.
Yes.
And I think Kyle, he'll obviously be the focal point of the team, and he's going to have to carry a lot of the offensive load, which is going to be a different role for him. Tyler's been that guy for BYU for the last 3 years, and so it's going to be a shift in role for Kyle. He's going to have to really expand his offensive game to do that. So Kyle's the lock at the 1. I think Nick Emery probably will start at the 2 based on sources I've talked to close to the program. They're expecting him to come in and start next year as a freshman, and Nick's expecting that as well. So I would plan to see him at the 2. I think Chase will probably start at the 3 as a senior and as a captain. And then down low, you'll probably see Nate at the 5 unless Corbin surpasses him. I think that could happen, but I think Nate's experience and his rebounding ability probably give him the edge at the 5. And then the 4 is the open question. I think Jamal Aites could challenge for that position, but I'm more leaning towards seeing probably Kyle Davis, at least at the beginning of the year. Kyle Davis has years of D1 experience under his belt. Jamal hasn't really played yet, and Kyle's proven himself. He played really, really well at Utah State last year and had a really big impact and was a really good rebounder and good offensive option. So I think at least at the beginning of the year, I think you'll see Kyle Davis maybe see more minutes down there at the 4. And then as the season goes along, I think Rose will, as he has every year, kind of feel it out and see who gives BYU the best lineup. Maybe it will become Jamal once he gets some more game experience and proves himself. But that's what I would say. Collinsworth, Emery, Davis, Austin, and Fisher to start the season.
I'm going to go with this lineup. Steve was in love with the small lineup this season. I'm going to go with the big lineup. Kyle at point guard, Jamal Aites at the 2.
Yeah.
No, it's gonna be like a football lineup right here. Kyle Davis at the 3, Nate Austin at the 4, and Corbin Kaufusi at the 5. We're getting every single rebound. We're not gonna make a lot of baskets, but we're gonna rebound the ball really well.
We're going to give a lot of penetration, though, and put a lot of people on the free throw line with fouls.
Yeah, I mean that's the Jake Welch style of basketball everyone knows and loves. That's the way I play the game. Real physical, not a lot of finesse, not a lot of smarts, but just a real good time.
You do have like a great running reverse finger roll that you throw behind your head in the lane. It's a work of art up until it doesn't go in the rim.
It goes in the rim about 50% of the time.
That'd be pretty good if you could get that. I haven't seen that yet. We'll have to play again together sometime soon.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's about as successful as Corbin Kaufusi's post moves. So that's all I gotta say about that.
I have a question.
His hands turned into symbols at least 4 times in this game, where it's like he wasn't able to move his fingers and like grip the ball. His hands were stuck like this, and he wasn't able. His fingers went out, and he wasn't able to catch the ball. He's trying to catch it with the inner part of his palms, and it was bad.
I don't know, like that's like he doesn't have good hands, and I don't know if that's something you can learn. Maybe you can strengthen your fingers, but he really needs to have better hands because he just can't catch. Like Collinsworth threw him a few passes tonight, and it's not a new thing. It happened throughout the season, where it's a great pass, but he just
it's basketball savvy. It's just experience with basketball.
Yeah. Hopefully they can improve that because, I mean, he needs to be able to catch passes on the interior if he's going to be an effective offensive player. You can't just, like, post him up and look him in the eye and say, I'm going to throw the ball to you now, Corbin. Put your hands up and catch it. Like, that's not going to work. So hopefully it improves.
I have a theory that he's going to start taking piano lessons over the summer, and then the news story won't be Corbin Kaufusi, former football player. It'll be Corbin Kaufusi takes piano lessons to increase hand-eye coordination. And scoring 10 points a game.
I like that a lot. Let's get somebody on that.
Done.
Question about Kyle Davis. Is he strictly a 4, or do you think he can also could he be a 3? Is there some versatility that he allows?
Yeah. I don't know the stats. I'd have to look at the numbers, but from what I remember from watching him at Utah State, I think he could step up in a 3 in a bigger lineup if you wanted to play like both Nate and Corbin together, or to put Jamal down on the block. I think he can step out and hit that mid-range jumper. Dave doesn't really play those types of lineups, and I'm not quite sure how that works with the kind of offense he runs in the half court. They do run that like perimeter weave, and I'm not sure that he's a good enough ball handler to really handle in that weave as well as they normally need to execute. You need at least 3 really good ball handlers to do that well. And really 4 if you can, which is why it worked really well with the 4-guard lineup. But you see like Josh Sharp out there, he like takes one dribble and like doesn't know where to go. And he like picks it up and he's trying to look for a pass, and it makes it a little bit more herky-jerky. So I think he could play the 3. I think they just have to play differently. It would be it's an interesting thing to think about. I don't know. He could come out and surprise me and really be able to space the floor. That would be the problem with that lineup, is the floor space enough? Are there enough ball handlers, or is it getting too crowded down in the paint?
Okay. Well, I was just curious. I was just thinking, the other thing I wanted to just, as a take, I guess, but I've always kind of felt like Nate Austin would be fulfilling his destiny as like an energy 6-man, like off the bench. He likes to do this to the crowd and tell them to get into it, but I just kind of feel like I've always had this feeling about Nate Austin that he is kind of, his destiny was to be this wonderful 6-man, and then he was on a team where he was the best big guy, and I would love to see him maybe find his way into that role next season. I think that would be his best spot, like 20 minutes a game, 25 minutes if he's really rebounding or whatever the matchups are, but really see him come in and give a lift like that. I don't know. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting role for him. I'm not opposed to it. I particularly don't care who starts. I care more who finishes. And I think that's a lot of times dictated to matchups, hopefully, except for not tonight. I didn't feel like Dave really played the matchups very well at the end of the game. But hopefully you have the 5 best that match up at the end of the game regardless of who starts. I think that's a good role for Nate to come in and provide that energy and to just be the crazy guy that runs everywhere and dives on the floor and takes charges. I think that works as a 6th man. So it could be something to explore. I'm just more worried about how do you delve out those minutes, divide out those minutes amongst the bigs. And if Corbin really makes a big leap, and you want to throw him a bunch of minutes, and he's gonna be a really effective post player, then yeah, you can afford to cut back on Nate and bring him in as that 6th man. So it's an interesting thing. I don't think it's set in stone by any means about how that post rotation looks next year. I think there's going to be a lot of competition. I think there's a lot of options. I think there's a lot of different ways they can play and use those post players. So it'll really just depend on how it goes this summer. Does Nate, have a summer? How does Corbin develop? Does Nate's hamstring allow him to have a full summer to practice and get better?
Jacob
Hartsock in the mix. Braden Shaw's back next year. They'll be freshmen, fresh off the mish, so who knows what they look like.
You didn't say anything about Corey Calvert. Gosh dang it. Mention his name already.
Corey Calvert, they could throw a point guard down there at the 5, just for old time's sake.
Mr. Colorado.
Chaparral High School, go Wolverines. Who knows? It's all up in the air at this point. There's however many days till basketball season. A lot of them.
Rose is going to have a lot of flexibility available to him, and I think that's the thing. Okay, why don't we finish here? You're going to look back on this game against Ole Miss 5 years from now, and what on earth are you going to think? What will you remember?
I will remember the sinking feeling of dread that slowly came into my stomach as the second half started, and I felt it coming, and I knew what was coming, and I was powerless to stop it. I think I tweeted about like the 16-minute mark. Let's not reverse Iona this, which we then, of course, proceeded to do, and which I knew at about the 18-minute mark was about to happen because they came out. You had that injury to Kyle at the end of the first half, and
Right.
it was like, oh, crap. Like, even if it's not a really bad injury, he's going to be tentative. He's going to feel like he's going to be wigged out about his knee, which he should be. And then they came out flat at the beginning of the second half. The shots weren't falling. Ole Miss got to the rim easily on like 3 of their first 4 possessions. It was just the defense wasn't there, the intensity wasn't there, and you could just feel it, and you knew it was coming. And it took 12 minutes for it to really happen, 13 minutes. But you saw it coming in those first 2 minutes after halftime. And
the worst part is that they juked
terrible.
me. It got down to 5, and then BYU they put it back to 9 again, and I thought, oh, look at this, they're going to counter, and then they turned it over 3 in a row, and then it was a 2-point game.
As Benjamin Wagner, friend of the program, would say, it's not a real BYU game until they give you the hope. They give you that bit of hope and just lets you like rise up a little bit. Oh, they're not going to blow it, and then they crush you and they take away everything that you hold dear, and they lose.
Yeah, they take away your will to live.
That's what they do. I don't have a lot of that right now, unfortunately.
It's I just remember seeing those like 4 or 5 alley-oop dunks that Ole Miss had, and every single this is the situation. I'm sitting in a church meeting with my phone, and I have my phone propped up against my computer like this. So I'm like looking at my computer screen, like, oh yeah, taking notes about church stuff. I'm really watching. I'm really watching the game on my phone, and I just see all of these massive like thunderous dunks. I can't hear anything on the commentary, but I just see the entire bench from Ole Miss explode and go crazy, and their players just hooping and hollering and stuff. And I can't hear anything, so I can't really get a sense for what's going on in the arena or anything like that. But I'm just like, this is not good. Like, this is not good at all. And then I just see lazy passes down on BYU's end, and I was just like, man, I think that we want to give this one away or something. I don't know, but it was just so frustrating to sit there and watch. And then someone started chewing with their mouth open while I was in this meeting, and like BYU turned the ball over, and simultaneously, and I let out this just really big and I kept my composure the entire time during the meeting until that one moment everyone's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "Sorry, my stomach is hurting." And everyone was just like, all right, well, Jake's a crazy person. So
Classic Jake Welch.
It's classic Jake.
Hey, you're always at the church whenever we do one of these things. It's amazing.
It's always on a Tuesday night. It's always Tuesday nights.
That's how you know that Jake's a righteous individual with important church calling.
What are we learning about up here? Family life? I don't know.
Good for you. My memory of this game, obviously, it'll be about, when you go trick-or-treating and sometimes you get to the door and then like you get the whole candy bar, like a full-size candy bar, and you're like, yes. That was the first half. Then there's times when you go and it's like an old lady and she gives you a bit of honey.
I love a bit of honey.
Oh. Well, what? Some sort of, what's with those hard candies that have like a nondescript flavor? Like you just throw them in and they're just like, what the world is this thing? Anyway, that was the second half. It was really one of the things that, the other thing I'll remember from this game, obviously Haas is 33, but just to kind of, it sucks because they lost, but I think Kyle Collinsworth had the best dunk in the history of the school.
Yeah.
In tonight's game. I don't think it's up there, and I think it is probably the greatest dunk in the history of the school.
It was thunderous, to say nothing else. It will be on SportsCenter's top 10 tonight for sure, and it will make the One Shining Moment video because it was a great dunk. Although to your candy analogy, I think the better analogy is to like improve upon it is like the first half was getting the king size candy bar. And then the second half was like unwrapping the king-size candy bar and finding out that they had hidden razor blades inside of it, like my mom always warned me about when I went trick-or-treating as a kid. And then you bit into it, and it sliced your mouth open, and you bled out and died.
Can you imagine how horrible a human must be to hide razor blades inside of candy? Like, spending their time, like, opening the Twix bar, hiding the razor blade in there, and then, like, wrapping it back up and, like, sealing it in. You would have to really hate children.
You know who I think would do that? Frank Bartley. I'm just kidding, Frank, but please don't trip over any half-court lines anytime soon in my presence ever again. Man.
Hey, Frank Bartley, though, his streak, I think he's got like a 30-game streak now going of when he plays of an offensive foul, getting a charge.
Yeah. The one he got tonight was actually a terrible call, by the way, because he like slipped and like brushed the guy with his head, and the guy like acted like he ate a razor blade.
But if you're crazy out of control, they're going to call it.
Yeah, no, it was a terrible play. Actually, I think the correct call on the play was that Bartley traveled. So it was like the same result anyway. Ole Miss should have gotten the ball. But yeah, the correct call on the play was definitely Bartley traveling because he just fell on his face. But the guy looked suitably maimed, so they gave him the offensive foul.
All right, fellas, final thoughts.
Yeesh. Look, that was a bad way for it to end. Obviously, you feel like the pit in your stomach as it's happening, and then you feel worse after it actually happens. But trying to put some perspective on it, it was a really fun season. This was a really fun team to watch, particularly as we saw during the first half tonight when they were, shooting and the shots were falling and things were going well. They're funner than any team, I think, in the country. So it was really fun. It was a really fun team, a really fun season. But as we saw in the second half, was also a fatally flawed team, a fatally flawed season, and that ultimately is going to hurt. And I don't know if they're going to be better next year or not. I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens over the summer. But it was a good year. It was a fun year. They made the tournament. That should be the baseline requirement. Would have hoped they had gone a little farther, but they were who we thought they were. Fun team, but a flawed team. And you know what? That's okay. You could have it a lot worse. You could be rooting for somebody terrible. So it was good.
Yeah. Steve always talks about the very exciting brand of basketball that Dave Rose brings to the table. Tyler Haws was a perfect player to fit within the system. He just delivered very consistently every night, putting up a lot of points. I'm just sad that his career is over. I mean, I remember writing something about this on some blog somewhere. That I remember during the BYU UCLA football game, the one where we beat them like 59-0. And I remember I was sitting on the sidelines, and there was this basketball recruit that I was hearing about named Tyler Haws, and there was a bunch of these other high school kids were kind of crowded around him, and they said, "Hey Tyler, you excited? You excited to be here, whatever?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, this will be a fun time," and stuff like that. And like throughout the game, you could just kind of like see him. He was just kind of like around the stadium and stuff like that. I'm like, it would be so cool if he came and played at BYU, because remember he was a big deal. And I remember thinking to myself, it'd be so great if he came to BYU. I hope he'd have a great career here. It'd be so awesome if he could commit. It'd be a great recruit for Dave Rose. And it's so weird to think that it's come and gone so quick. It always goes so quickly. So cherish it. Just if I'm gonna end on one thing, I'm gonna be like Billy Madison going to the little fat kid who's still in the 4th grade. He said, cherish it. Cherish it while you still can. So, yeah.
There have only been 19 players who've ever scored more points than Tyler Haws playing college basketball. There is not another person who's ever worn the white and blue for BYU to score more points than Tyler Haws. The most difficult thing to do in basketball is score points, and he knew how to do it better than anybody else. And, I just think he was lethal in transition, and he was unbelievable running and moving without the ball, and maybe the most savvy guy at finding his way to the line, because he was just great. He was just great. He did so many little things, and every year he added something new. And one of my big what ifs will be, what if he didn't go on a mission and he would have been the small forward on the Jimmer Fredette senior year team? That's going to be something I've thought about a lot. I don't know if it would have changed much. All I know is that it would have been a lot of fun to see that one too. But Tyler Haws, kudos. It's been a pleasure watching you play.
Yeah, that was, I think I said this earlier, but that's one of the truly great and historic careers that we've ever seen at BYU, and you should be appreciated as such. As much as we always look forward to the future and we're always thinking about, what are the Lone Peak kids going to do, that's really the year that we're set up to really make deep runs. Nick Emery and TJ Haws and, everybody else. As Jake said, you need to stop and you need to cherish it. You need to appreciate the moment you just lived in. And I think, it's a little hard to do that because, we just to come off the excitement of Jimmer, and that was such an amazing thing. And it was the national media attention was insane. And so Tyler coming immediately after that, it felt kind of like a little bit more small time. But the actual things that he accomplished were amazing, and it will be a different program next year when the balls start bouncing again in the Marriott Center. And it, for better or for worse, I'd say it'd probably be for worse. You just don't replace a guy like Tyler Haws overnight, but it was a pleasure to have watched him, and I wish him nothing but the best wherever his next stop may be, because he'll always be one of the greats.
One more interesting note on him: maybe the greatest return missionary athlete in the history of BYU sports.
Yeah, I'd say probably is. He paved the way, right? I mean, the Haws program is what everyone else is going to follow now to come back from remission and get back into it. Kyle Collinsworth did it. Obviously, we see how he turned out. Hopefully, everyone else does. He was great.
Okay, that's it for the three-man weave. We'll be back next season. Cougars go down tonight, Ole Miss, 94-90.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.